If I had known that dinner would be the last time I ever stepped foot in that house, I probably wouldn't have worn the dress Mom once gave me. If I had known that just a few words over turkey could make a father disown his daughter, I would have stayed home and eaten instant noodles instead. But I went, carrying a fragile hope that maybe this year would be better than the last. I didn't realize that cold night in Connecticut, I wouldn't just lose a Thanksgiving dinner, I would lose my whole family. And the bitterest part, I was right to believe I never really belonged there. That year's Thanksgiving dinner was held in the ivory three-story house nestled deep in a wealthy suburb outside Hartford, Connecticut. My mom prepared the traditional stuffed turkey, cinnamon-roasted sweet potatoes, and a plate of glossy cranberries no one actually ate. Everything looked like it came straight out of a holiday magazine, at least on the surface. I'm Madison, 25, the only child without a clear achievement. My sister, Sarah, is a corporate attorney in New York. My brother, Michael, is a software engineer at Google. And me. I work freelance, running a small startup focused on online mental health care. No fixed salary, no office, no big name. In other words, I'm the concern in my parents' eyes. The moment I stepped through the door, I could feel the judgment in everyone's eyes. My cousin Lindsay whispered something to my mom, then burst out laughing. My dad wore his usual stern expression, nodded once at me, then went back to discussing Tesla stocks with Michael. No one asked how I was doing. No one cared what I'd been working on. All they needed to know was that I was different, and that alone made me a failure in their eyes. When everyone sat down at the table, the atmosphere turned heavy. Each person took turns bragging about their successes that year. Sarah had just won a big case. Michael got a raise and was about to buy a house. Lindsay had twins and got promoted to HR associate director. I stayed quiet, forcing a smile and picking at my salad. Then it was my turn. Mom asked like she was checking a box. And you, Madison? That therapy thing online something, is that going okay? I nodded, answering softly. Yeah, it's growing. I just brought on 2 new specialists last month and getting ready for our first round of funding. Dad set his fork down. Funding. So it's still not making money. How long do you plan to keep working on that useless app? I tried to stay calm. It's not useless, Dad. We've helped over 500 users so far. Mostly young people who can't talk to their families or friends. Think. Enough, Madison. My father cut me off coldly. This family doesn't need that mental health nonsense. If you want to play that game, then stop using my last name. Be independent like you say, and take responsibility for it. The whole table went silent. My mom said nothing. Sarah turned away. Michael stared at his phone. I sat there, hands trembling, feeling hollow inside. My father had disowned me, right there in front of everyone, just because I wasn't like them. 'Cause I chose a different path. I set my napkin down, stood up, and said only one thing. If that's what you want, then I don't need to be part of this family anymore. Then I walked out of the house, into the cold November night, alone. I wandered down sidewalks covered in fallen leaves, both hands buried deep in the pockets of my thin coat. The early winter wind bit through my sleeves. The house behind me still glowed with warm light and familiar laughter. But to me that place was no longer home. What hurt most wasn't what my father said. It was that no one defended me. No one stopped him. Not a single look of sympathy. I felt like a stranger in the very place I grew up. But the truth is, I'd always felt that way. Since I was little, I'd been the different one in the Harlow family. My mom loved her tea parties with friends, Sarah always topped her class, and Michael was obsessed with math and computers. And me. I liked to draw. I asked questions that made adults pause, like, why do we all have to succeed the same way? Or, if school doesn't make me happy, can I stop going? My dad never liked those questions. He was the kind of man who believed in discipline and achievement. A successful real estate businessman, he thought there were only 3 things in life that mattered. Study hard, work big, make money. I didn't fit into any of those. When I was 15, I wanted to take a summer art class. I spent a month working part-time at a bookstore to pay the tuition. When I brought the form home, my dad glanced at it and ripped it in half right in front of me. He said, "Art doesn't feed anyone. If you want to live in dreams, don't live in this house." Cried. He walked out like nothing had happened. All through high school I tried to do well, but never as well as Sarah. She got praised for every award. I only ever heard, "Good, but you could do better." I started withdrawing, journaling instead of speaking. The feeling of never being enough settled in my bones. I smiled when expected, nodded when scolded, and tried to live as quietly troublesome as possible. When I got into a top university to study psychology, I thought things would finally change. But Dad said, "Pick a different major. Psychology is for the weak. Business or law, that's a real future." Tried. I switched majors, studied what he wanted. And I died a little inside with every class. I remember one night, up until 3 a.m. finishing a finance presentation, hands shaking from exhaustion. I looked into the dorm mirror and didn't recognize myself. After the first semester I dropped out. I knew my parents wouldn't accept it, so I didn't tell them. I rented a small room near Seattle, worked part-time at a coffee shop, and went back to studying what I loved, behavioral psychology. I left the path they'd drawn for me. People said I was selfish, reckless. But only I knew how badly I needed saving. The idea for a safe haven, a virtual therapy platform, came when a close friend nearly took his life because he was too afraid to tell his parents he was depressed. I couldn't help him back then. But I could build a place where people like him wouldn't have to suffer alone anymore. I spent the entire first year doing research, learning how to code, writing content for the website, handling social media, and working part-time jobs to save every penny I could. I was rejected over 40 times when applying for funding. There was a time I had to live on instant noodles for 2 weeks just to pay for the website domain. But I didn't give up. Because every thank you message from our earliest users, every story shared by young people struggling with their families, made me feel like I was doing something that mattered. And also because I needed to prove to myself that I was no longer the little Madison who was always compared, belittled, and told to stay quiet. I didn't need to shout, "I deserve to be loved," to my family anymore. I was going to show the whole world through action. I didn't have my parents' support, but I had myself. And for the first time in my life, I believed that was enough. I restarted my life on a cold December morning in a cheap rental room in Capitol Hill, Seattle. The room was small, the walls were old and damp, and the only furniture was a worn-out bed and a peeling wooden desk. But to me it was the first space that truly belonged to me. No one told me how I should live. No one forced a future onto my shoulders anymore. I made a living through odd jobs. Waiting tables, online tutoring, remote data entry. Some weeks, I worked 3 jobs at once just to cover rent and internet bills. In my free time, I went to the library, studying both psychology and basic programming, writing every line of code for the first prototype of Safe Haven. I had no investors, no mentors. Just a fragile belief that pain could be a foundation if you dared to build on it. At first, my idea was simple. Create a space where young people could speak their truth without fear of being judged, just like I had once been afraid. An app that connected users to mental health professionals anonymously and more affordably than traditional therapy. But the deeper I dug, the more heartbreaking truths I uncovered. Thousands, even tens of thousands of people had been hurt by their own families and didn't know how to begin healing. I wrote every line of copy, every page of the interface, filmed my own explanation videos, and posted them on TikTok, Reddit, and in psychology forums. I couldn't afford a designer, so I learned to design with free software. I couldn't pay for professional hosting, so I used trial plans and created fake accounts to stretch the time. I did everything myself, scared but driven, like walking a tightrope across a canyon with no safety net below. There were nights I sat alone in the dark, hands shaking from hunger, my mind swirling with doubt. Does anyone care? Who am I doing this for? And then one morning I got my first email from a user. "I saw your app on Reddit. I've been abused by my family since I was a kid. Never told anyone. Last night I spoke to a therapist for the first time in my life. I'm still crying. But I want to keep living. Thank you." I broke down in tears. Not just from emotion, but because for the first time in years, I felt like what I was doing truly mattered. After 3 months, I had my first 500 users. Mostly from the LGBTQ+ community, young people dealing with anxiety, mild depression, or those abandoned by their families like me. A few therapists agreed to offer their services for free during the early stage because they believed in my idea. I began raising my first seed round, sending proposals to over 20 small investment funds, and was rejected by almost all of them. The reasons were often the same. You don't have a college degree. You don't have a team. The mental health market is already too saturated. I just smiled and kept going. I didn't have a degree hanging on a wall, but I had what they couldn't see. Real experience, real pain, and relentless resilience. In the 8th month, I joined a small pitching event for female founders in Seattle. I didn't have high hopes. Most participants were from top universities or had already raised money. But when I got on stage, I opened with, "My father disowned me because I didn't follow the path he chose." But that very rejection helped me build a place where thousands of people feel heard for the first time. The room went silent. And then applause. At the end of the event, an angel investor, Ms. Evelyn Martinez, approached me. She was a former psychologist. She said, "You don't need more degrees. You need more chances. And I think I can help you get one." A week later, I received a $250,000 seed investment from Evelyn. That wasn't the end. It was the real beginning. I hired my first developer, redesigned the entire platform, built security systems, and standardized services with licensed therapists. I no longer had to juggle 3 jobs to survive. I rented my first office space, a small room in a co-working hub, but to me it was a dream come true. I've never returned to Connecticut since that Thanksgiving night. But sometimes when I see the Seattle lights flicker through my foggy window, I remember the last thing I said at that dinner table. If that's what you want, then I don't need to be part of this family anymore. I didn't know if I truly believed it back then. But now I do. I didn't lose a family. Found myself. On my first day stepping into the tiny office in Fremont, I stood still, staring at the blank whiteboard, then placed my hand on the wall, just to make sure it was real. After nearly 2 years of struggling, disappointment, and self-doubt, I finally had a place I could call headquarters. No more working on the floor. No more online meetings in coffee shops. No more signing contracts with therapists using a personal email account. I bought a small vase of flowers to place in the corner of my desk, not for decoration, but to remind myself each day. This is the life I've replanted with my own hands, after others had trampled the soil I started with. From Evelyn Martinez's $250,000 investment, I was able to hire a seasoned developer named Kyle, a communications intern, and an experienced therapist to lead our content coordination. All 3 of them believed in the mission of building a place to heal those wounded by their own families. We worked 10 to 12 hours a day, ate cold pizza, sat in old chairs, but everyone was full of energy. In the early days, every time a new user signed up, the whole room would cheer like kids. Kyle once joked, "If we ever get 100 downloads in a day, I'll jump on the table and sing." Surprisingly, less than 3 weeks later, he had to keep his promise. And he did. He sang terribly, but I'll never forget that moment. Our first major milestone came in the 3rd month after receiving funding. A blog post I wrote about family trauma being ignored during the holidays unexpectedly went viral. Over 800,000 views in just 5 days. Thousands of comments shared personal stories. Parents forcing their kids to live a certain way, relatives cutting ties over sexuality, the invisible pressure of family gatherings. Safe Haven was mentioned in online communities as a place to breathe, to survive the holidays, to start over with yourself. Downloads increased tenfold in a month. I knew it was time to scale up. We redesigned the entire system, hired 3 more therapists, and optimized the matching algorithm to better connect users with the right professionals. Standing in our small meeting room, I presented a 6-month roadmap to the team. We're not just building an app. We're giving people a second chance, to understand themselves, to forgive themselves, and to live without needing approval from those who hurt them. No one said a word, just nodded, then got back to work. Success kept building. After 6 months, Safe Haven had over 50,000 users. Mostly young people, students, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and those estranged from their families. Our monthly retention rate was over 70%. A media company invited me to an interview on the topic Female Founders Redefining Healing. I declined a few shallow offers but accepted one from a podcast dedicated to mental health. The interview lasted just 45 minutes, but it changed everything. A short clip, only 30 seconds, was cut and posted on Instagram. I didn't create Safe Haven to prove my family wrong. I built it to prove to myself that I'm not worthless, like they once made me believe. That clip got over 2 million views in a week. Public figures shared it. Psychology professors included it in their lectures. I received thank you letters from Canada, Australia, even from an American soldier stationed overseas. And then, as if inevitably, messages from family started arriving. The first was from Sarah. "You're doing great. We've been following you for a while. Dad, he doesn't say much, but he knows." Then my mom called. Her voice was softer than I ever remembered. "Are you okay? I've been seeing your name online a lot." "I'm okay, Mom." Your dad's still the same. But I think he's starting to reconsider." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel proud. Just quiet. Like an old scar, it doesn't bleed anymore, but it never really disappears. I still haven't replied to Sarah's message. And I'm not in a rush. Because I know I'm building my own family now. Not by blood but by choice. Every new user, every honest story shared, every therapist who joins us, they are all part of what I never had at that Thanksgiving table. A place, a voice, and unconditional love. I think I'm finally ready not to need them anymore. After all those years trying to prove otherwise, I've truly come to believe. Not everyone who gives you life deserves to walk beside you for the rest of it. But strangely enough, when people start to come back, it's not the door that has to reopen. It's your own heart. I began noticing signs of them everywhere. One day, I received an invitation from my old high school, asking me to return as a guest speaker for the senior career day. I had dropped out of that school. I smiled, but I still accepted. On the day of the talk, just as I finished speaking, I spotted a familiar face in the last row. My mother. She didn't say anything. Just looked at me. When everyone was leaving, she walked up, gently placed her hand on my arm and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't understand you sooner." I didn't know what to say. That apology came too late, too soft, and yet too real. Stirred something inside me. A few days later, I received an email from my brother Michael. "The whole family's been following Safe Haven. You did something no one thought you could. And it's made me take a hard look at myself." My sister, as usual, kept her familiar distant tone. "You're planning to host a conference in New York. If you need legal support, just let us know." I wasn't sure what they wanted. Maybe remorse. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe they simply didn't want to be left behind in a story they no longer controlled. But the one person who still hadn't said a word was my father. Until I got a call from my mother on a Friday night. "Your father was just admitted to the hospital." I went silent, gripping the phone tightly. She continued. "It's high blood pressure. Not serious, but the doctor says he needs to rest. Since being admitted, he hasn't spoken to anyone, but yesterday, he asked me something. Is Madison doing okay?" I didn't know what I felt. Not pity. Not joy. Just a hollow space inside me wanting to be filled. My mother cautiously asked, "Would you consider visiting him?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked up at the whiteboard in the office where I stood. Still the same small office, but now filled with over 20 people working every day for Safe Haven. In the corner of the board, I had once written, "I don't need anyone's approval to be who I am." But I also realized, forgiveness doesn't mean weakness. And going back doesn't mean giving in. 3 days later, I arrived at the hospital in Hartford. The smell of antiseptic caught in my throat. My father lay in bed, looking much thinner than I remembered. His eyes were closed, but when I entered, He opened them and stared at me for a long moment. Madison. He softly said my name for the first time in almost 4 years. I nodded, unsure of what to say. He reached out his hand. I hesitated, then stepped closer. I made a lot of mistakes, he said slowly, each word hitting me in the chest. I thought you needed to be corrected, but the truth is, I was just scared. Scared that if you took a different path, everything I've believed in all my life might be wrong. And I couldn't handle that. I didn't cry, but my throat tightened. I replied, I never needed you to be right. I just needed you to stand by me, even once. He lowered his head. Tears fell onto the white pillow. I didn't know whether to forgive or hold on to it all. But then I thought of the thousands of people on Safe Haven who had once written, I want to forgive, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I sat down beside his bed. I didn't take his hand. I didn't smile. I just sat there quietly. I don't know what will happen next. I'm not sure if my family has truly changed. But I do know that I'm no longer the girl who was cast out of the Thanksgiving dinner table just for being herself. Now I'm the one who built an entirely new table. And if they want a seat at it, the first thing they'll need to bring is sincerity. That fall, I received a rare handwritten letter. Not an email, not a message. A thick envelope, carefully penned, postmarked from Hartford. I recognized the handwriting. It was my mother's. This Thanksgiving, the whole family will gather like we used to. If you feel ready, I hope you'll come. Not for your father. Not for me. But for yourself. Maybe it's time to close the chapter we left unfinished. I read it 7 times. Not because I was unsure, but because I was asking myself, do I need this? I had lived without them for 4 years. I hadn't fallen apart. I had grown stronger than ever. But deep down I knew, some confrontations are necessary. Not for reconciliation but for closure. I didn't tell anyone in the family. Didn't reply to my mother. I simply booked a flight back to Hartford and chose a soft cream-colored suit, along with the heels I once promised to wear only for important occasions. This time I decide what qualifies as important. The familiar 3-story house appeared in the car window like an old photograph. The shingles, the porch, the lawn, all the same as the day I left. But I wasn't. I stepped out of the car, quiet and confident. The door opened. The first to see me was my sister, Madison. Sarah froze, her voice nearly breaking. You really came. I simply nodded. No hug. No blame. No rush to reconnect. I walked past her, straight into the living room. The very room where, 4 years ago, I stood up and left the family dinner after my father disowned me in front of everyone. The space was still the same. The long wooden table, the white china with gold trim, red wine being poured. But the way people looked at me had changed. They no longer saw me as the odd one out, but rather as the woman they could no longer figure out. No one spoke right away. Not until my father stepped out from his room. He looked at me, his eyes lingering on the small logo pinned to my blazer, the Safe Haven symbol. You really came, he said quietly. I replied, without resentment, without sarcasm. I came to finish something that was left unresolved. Not to seek forgiveness. He nodded. No argument. No bluster. He was no longer the man who once crushed my dreams with a single sentence. Therapy is useless. Now he was just a father, standing before a daughter who had proved everything without needing him. Everyone sat down at the table. Dinner began. The atmosphere was awkward at first, but gradually questions surfaced. You really run the whole platform? Michael asked hesitantly. I heard Safe Haven mentioned on a radio show in Boston last week. Where have you taken it so far? Sarah asked. I answered briefly but clearly. We just passed 1 million users. Preparing to launch the international version. Silence. And then the unexpected happened. My father stood up. He raised his glass, looked around the table, and finally fixed his gaze on me. Tonight, I don't have grand words to make up for the past. But I can admit one thing. Madison, you took a path no one in this family dared to take. And you succeeded. Not because of luck, but because you believed in something I once dismissed. The table fell silent. My mother wiped away a tear. Sarah lowered her eyes. I said nothing. I didn't nod. I didn't raise my glass. I just looked at him for a long time, then asked, if today I were just an ordinary girl, never well known, never had a company, would you be saying these words? He tightened his grip on the wine glass. Didn't answer. I continued. I don't need belated validation. I just need everyone to understand one thing. I was never weak. I just was never heard. I stood up, pulled an envelope from my jacket pocket, and placed it in the middle of the table. This is an official invitation. Safe Haven will open its Boston branch early next year. If anyone in the family wants to attend the launch, you're welcome. But how you show up, as family or as a guest, that's for each of you to decide. No one said a word. I turned and walked toward the door. Before I left, I looked back and said softly, 4 years ago, I left this table with nothing but empty hands. Today, I walk away with an entire community behind me. I'm no longer looking for a seat at this family's table. I've built my own. I stepped out onto the porch. A light rain had begun to fall. The scent of damp earth and fallen maple leaves mingled in the air, strangely comforting. Smiled. The launch of Safe Haven's Boston branch took place on a brisk but sunny spring morning. The glass building stood modestly among busy office blocks, but the sleek steel Safe Haven sign turned heads of every passerby. I stood at the entrance, dressed in a black suit, holding a microphone, looking out over the rows of guests. Nearly 200 people were there that day. Licensed therapists, investors, former users, friends, colleagues, the media. And in the second row sat my mother, Michael, and Sarah. My father didn't come. But I wasn't surprised. A part of me had stopped hoping. And oddly, I was at peace with that. I began my speech. A few years ago, I sat in a warm living room surrounded by people who shared the Harlow name, and felt like a stranger. I was disowned at a dinner that was supposed to bring people together. And that very night I made a decision. If my family didn't have space for me, I'd build a space for people like me. Today, Safe Haven is here not because I'm special, but because I dared to believe that wounds can also be a beginning. Applause broke out and lingered. I bowed, not out of gratitude but out of respect for myself, the girl who was once silenced, now standing tall on her own stage. After the ceremony, as guests slowly began to leave, I stepped out to the courtyard for some fresh air. My mother quietly joined me, holding a cup of hot tea. You make me proud. You didn't used to believe in me. I said, not harshly, just stating a fact. No. And I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just want you to know. I'm learning to listen, even if it's late. He nodded. That was all I needed from her. Not an excuse, but sincerity. Sarah came last. She didn't say much, just handed me an envelope. You're going to need your own lawyer for the expansion contracts in New York. If you're open to it, I'd like to apply. I looked at her and smiled. I don't choose people because they're family. I choose those who respect my journey. If you're that person, I'm ready. We shook hands like two grown women for the first time in our lives, with no one trying to outdo the other. No one needing to be right to earn respect. A few months later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter with only a few lines. I don't know if I deserve a new beginning, but if you'll let me, I'd like to start by listening. Safe Haven is your pride. You're mine. Dad. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. I simply folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer at the office, right next to Safe Haven's first signed contract. That night, I stood on the top floor of our office building, looking out at the city lights. Down there were thousands of people, each carrying an untold story, an unhealed wound, a dream once laughed at. I used to be one of them. And now I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't need anyone's permission to live as myself. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. Chose myself. And that was the best decision I ever made. Madison's story isn't just about rising from the pain of family rejection. It's proof of the power of believing in yourself when no one else will. From the girl disowned by her father on Thanksgiving night, Madison built Safe Haven, a healing platform for millions who've been hurt by those meant to love them. Today, she's not just successful. She's a symbol for anyone brave enough to choose themselves and rewrite the life others once tried to script for them. What do you think about Madison's journey? Would you choose family? Or would you choose yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about life, family, and the choices that define us.